Some people consider it the responsibility of U.S. citizens to follow the country's laws, and that the government has the right and even the responsibility to execute criminals when they fail to do so. Other people consider it our constitutional right to be protected from cruel and unusual punishment, and that the government has the responsibility of ensuring that these executions are not cruel and unusual. Cruel and unusual punishment is prohibited by the 8th Amendment of our Constitution. This includes torture, degrading punishment, or punishment that is too severe for the crime committed. Throughout the history of crime and punishment, there have been many methods of executing criminals who commit horrendous crimes. Occasionally, these executions are considered botched, causing the method to evolve to become more humane in the eyes of the law. Ever since capital punishment began in 1862, it has changed, not only in the method of execution, but also in which crimes are punishable by death.
The gas chamber, the electric chair, lethal injection, the machinery of death. Under American justice, their use is not cruel and unusual punishment.
Hanging was the primary method of execution until the 1890s. Although hanging is still an option in Washington and Delaware, lethal injection is primarily used. The last execution by hanging took place on January 25, 1996. The prisoner is weighed the day before the execution, and a practice run is done with a sandbag the same weight. This is done to determine the length of the rope, to ensure a quick death. If the rope is too long, it may decapitate the prisoner, and if the rope is too short, it may take up to 45 minutes for death to occur. Before the hanging, the prisoner's arms and legs are secured. He or she is blindfolded, and the noose is placed around their neck. Once the trapdoors are opened, the prisoner's weight should cause a rapid fracture or a dislocation of the neck. However, immediate death rarely occurs. Tom Ketchum, also known as Blackjack, was convicted of murdering his neighbor and sentenced to death. Blackjack was hung on April 25, 1901. His hanging turned into a big town event where tickets were sold. They even sold little dolls of Blackjack hanging on a stick. However, when the hanging occurred and the trapdoors were opened, Blackjack's body fell to the ground. He had been beheaded. When an error occurs, such as this, in an execution, does the government have the responsibility to create more humane ways of executing criminals? Are these changes responsible for the evolution of capital punishment? The next method to be used for execution was firing squad. The majority of people executed by firing squad were military personnel. The process is simple. The criminal is placed in front of a wall or another solid object. In most cases, they are blindfolded. Sometimes they ask not to be so they could watch their execution. 5 more soldiers would line up. Upon command, they would fire directly at the white dot placed over the prisoner's heart. All shooters are required to fire. All but one shooter is given a loaded gun, so there is no certainty as to which shooter fired the fatal shot. Oftentimes, even after all shots are fired, the prisoner is still alive. At this point in the execution, shots are fired from close range. Wallace Wickerson is a convicted murderer, condemned to die by firing squad. Wanting to die like a man, Wallace asked not to be blindfolded. He was placed in front of his executors. As usual, the white dot was placed over his heart, but it was not secured correctly, causing it to move. Wallace was shot in the left arm, shattering it. The rest of the bullets pierced his torso. 27 minutes after the attempted execution, Wallace died of blood loss.
The gas chamber was first used in 1924 on G. John. They had an unsuccessful attempt to pump gas into his cell while he slept, because the cell did not have an airtight seal. This caused prisons to start making gas chambers. In gas chambers, cyanide tablets are dropped into a container with sulfuric acid directly under the chair, which reacts, creating a deadly gas that the victim would inhale, resulting in death.
Jimmy Lee Gray was convicted of murdering 2 underage girls. He was executed in the gas chamber on September 2, 1983, in Mississippi. When the cyanide was put in the gas chamber, he began gasping for air, and then he violently beat his head against the metal pole behind him for 10 minutes before he died. Spectators were asked to leave the viewing area, and the gas chamber was ruled cruel and unusual. Executions in the gas chamber did not cause immediate death. and occasionally the prisoner would react to the chemical, causing unpredictable behavior. Because of this, all but one state has determined the gas chamber to be cruel and unusual. After the gas chamber declined in use, they invented the electric chair. The electric chair was a very popular method of execution from the first prisoner in 1890 to the last prisoner in 1999. When prisoners sat down in the chair, they are strapped in by leather straps, securing their arms, legs, and heads. When the knobs were turned in the next room over, electricity was transferred into the prisoner through wires attached to them. They would give the prisoner around 500 to 2,000 volts of electricity until they died. They had to keep it under 6 amps or the body would burn. The 1997 execution of Pedro Medina in Florida by electric chair was considered botched. During the execution, flames shot out of the headpiece, filling the chamber with smoke. After the electricity had been switched off, Medina's chest continued to heave until the flames stopped. He died shortly after. The electric chair started to decline in use after many cases were reported as botched in the 1980s, and as more humane ways were developed. Is the government responsible for changing the method of execution when more humane ways are developed? A 3-drug combination was used for lethal injection until 2010. Pentobarbital, which produces a medically induced coma, pancrenomium bromide, which paralyzes the body and stops the prisoner's breathing, and potassium chloride, which stops the heart. After suffering from a shortage of drugs, we adopted other methods including one drug and compounding pharmacies. 8 states have announced the use of a single drug, a lethal dose of anesthetics. 5 states have announced their intent to use a single drug, but no executions have been carried out. Only Missouri has used a 2-drug protocol, but a second state intends to. 6 states are planning to use, or have used, compounding pharmacies to obtain their lethal injection. In 1944, George Stinney, a young African-American boy, was accused of murdering 2 white girls. The 2 girls had gone out to pick flowers and had never returned home. George helped search for the girls with the rest of the town, but made the mistake of telling officers he had seen them earlier that day. 3 white officers escorted George into a room for questioning and allegedly got a confession. Although there are no witnesses to the confession and no physical proof that he committed the crime, it took him less than 10 minutes to convince an all-white jury that he was guilty. At age 14, 5 foot 2 inches tall and only 90 pounds, George walked to his death with a Bible tucked under his arm. George was executed by electric chair, making him the youngest person to be executed in the 20th century. Should the government have the responsibility of preventing executions when the prisoner does not meet the age requirement? Ever since execution was brought into America in the 1800s, there have been numerous accounts of executions that have been considered botched. Some people feel that the government has the right to execute criminals when they fail to obey the laws. These are the same people that would agree with Bill Mahy when he says, "I think capital punishment works great. Every kill you kill never kills again." Other people believe that the government has the responsibility of ensuring that these executions are not botched, and these people would agree with Desmond Tutu when he said, "To take a life when a life has been lost is revenge, not justice."